Here to share some thoughts on processing trauma in the float tank. I want to share some of my personal experiences, but I don't want to get too personal because it's very vulnerable and sensitive material. There's a lot of ways in which floating can be healing for a person. I usually don't speak to this subject very often because I want people to discover the wisdoms of the tank on their own and what their subconscious brings up for them. Every float is unique to the individual, but at the same time there's things that you can do in there that can help you process stuff. Consistency of practice, showing up regularly, it creates this pattern ingrained in our consciousness. It gets us used to showing up and checking in and showing up and checking in to a point where it's like, oh, I'm not ignoring whatever's happening here. Going in there and making it a ritual, at least twice a week for me, for 4 years. That's been my pattern, okay? After 4 years, I finally got to a point where I've started to clear away some of the residue of the trauma that I experienced 10 years ago. I think some of the reasons why it started coming up now is as a result of having had a consistent practice and getting really comfortable in being with myself. Consistency of practice is really key as far as teaching oneself that this is a safe environment, that we're building a relationship with ourselves here because we're making sure that we're showing up, we're tending to that relationship. I just want to speak to some of the ways in which trauma can get moved around in there. Physically moving around in the tank. I call it intuitive flow, just allowing the body to move into whatever position it wants, and sometimes I'll spend my whole session flowing, and I spent 6 months flowing around in there and just allowing like the waters to move me and allowing myself to be moved, by my subtle emotions. Just listening to those subtle hints at what my body needs. What does my body need right now? Oh, I need to make a subtle adjustment like this. Oh, this feels really good. Oh, this is the next motion I need to do. And then just staying in that dialogue, So this was for me in many ways a waking up process as far as getting back into the body, staying present for what's here, getting okay with being here, because as a result of the trauma that I experienced a decade ago, part of me was like on a string, like a kite, just floating out there and not fully embodied. And as a result of that, I had encountered many health problems that were basically subconscious inviting me to get back over here and pay attention to some of the ways in which I can learn about myself and some of the ways in which I can be with myself and help myself heal. I noticed in the tank a lot of energy going towards like going like this with my hips, like trying to get my hips to move and unlock a little bit. Lots of like leg motions and like kind of laying in lotus position. Yeah, just finding different ways that I can let my hips feel open. Just listening to the intuitive cues from the body and following it and flowing with it and going with it. Creating a dialogue with my subconscious. There were a few floats 6 months ago where I was having visions of dying, drowning specifically. There was a lot of emphasis on having my last breath, and everything going to black and then dying and then experiencing the last breath for an eternity, or experiencing the moment just as I take in my last breath and waiting for someone to come save me. And for a little while I actually thought that was a past life thing that I was experiencing. I was receiving it as though it were a past life memory of myself drowning. That's actually kind of like an interesting metaphor and parallel that took place in reality, and I hadn't really pieced it together. But in my waking life 10 years ago, I had experienced somebody had choked me, and that person who choked me also threatened my life, and I didn't feel super safe, obviously, as you can imagine. When we experience trauma in our life, it's interesting because it seems to be related to a strand of trauma that goes down into our ancestral lineage. So, if a person isn't programmed with trauma, then they're less likely to invite trauma like this into their life. So what that revealed to me is that I had programming that I need to refine and clear and heal. I had the freeze response when this trauma happened to me, and so the freeze response promoted just a lot of anger at myself, and a lot of anger at myself, which then turned into sadness in response to the anger, and it was just like this tangled up knot in my heart, and it's taken me a decade, just peeling away these strands and trying to untie this whole thing. I realize it takes time. I've also tried various methods of cognitive behavioral therapy and You know, mostly, you know, not really getting too deep into those issues though, mostly just dealing with the surface level expression of how it manifests in my relationships. It's so interesting because this person who choked me was a person who I was in an intimate relationship with. Part of me associates intimate relationship with death. It's not great. And so I'm really trying to heal that because, yeah, like there's some baseline anxiety that exists there that I'm working on, but it's taking time, and I'm conscious of this stuff because I have to be, because if I were unconscious here, I mean, I wouldn't have much of a shot at having healthy relationships. I really want to have conscious relationships, and I think that we can have conscious relationships and have trauma in our past. It's possible. Actually, all of us have some degree of trauma, you know, even just being born is a traumatic event in many ways, you know. What I've learned is this stuff, this trauma will either come up consciously or unconsciously, but it's coming up. The subconscious and the body and all of this, very intelligent. It wants to function at an optimal level. It wants to be at its highest expression. And the only thing that stops it from happening is, you know, these subconscious blockages that we aren't allowing ourselves to move or unpack. And if we aren't conscious of them, it's really hard to do anything about them. So that's why the level of inquiry is really important, because when we delve into ourselves, we can see the things that are stuck and we can work with them. But you know, some people just see this as being way too much work and they just don't want to do anything about it. And that's unfortunate, because that's just going to allow that trauma to enact through you unconsciously. That's not going to be productive. That's going to promote a lot of projection in relationship. That's going to promote a lot of hostility and a lack of ownership and like a whole bunch of really unsavory qualities that can show up in relationship when triggers happen. Yeah, what's most important is empowerment and not remaining in the victim consciousness. And the work that I've been doing in the tank is beyond any of the work that I've done anywhere else. It's me and myself, and it's my own intuition, and it's my own guidance, and it's at my own pace. It's my own inquiry and my own responses. Like all of this is all fluidly happening in this environment in the exact way that it needs to. The metaphors that show up in the tank through dreams, dreamlike experiences, that's one way that I was processing it. Through physical motion, allowing my body to intuitively move, that's another way. Sometimes I'll just find myself just like rubbing my chest, you know, breathing, my hip, you know, just trying to move energy, just going like this. You know, tons of ways that I can be in there with my body and allowing that energy to move and just listening to the subtle things that my body needs. There's some thoughts and some reflections on processing trauma in the tank through personal account. As you see, I'm just a person who has access to these tanks and who has experience floating consistently and has experience actually doing some really deep work with herself in there. And I really wanted to share that with you. It's a really amazing way to move through healing and to move through trauma, and it doesn't involve any drugs, and it can be quite a psychedelic experience. Not to mention, it rewires your consciousness as well. It allows you to reprogram things and look at yourself in a certain way, an environment that often feels like you're being held completely. That's all I wanted to share for now, and I'm sure I'll check back in if I feel like there's anything else I want to share. I just also want to say that was really tough for me to share with you. Very sensitive material. It's a little scary, the idea of it being out there, but it's okay. That's all I wanted to say, and I'll check back in with you later, okay? Bye bye.